Hello, everyone. I hope you're all enjoying the conference so far. It's been kind of interesting to see some of the talks like Jesse's before, but yes. And thanks to Grads and Games for asking me to speak as well. I'm Zoe, as has been told. I'm a tools programmer at Rockstar Games, and I've been working there for about 5 years now. I do a lot of other extracurricular things too. I'm a Women in Games ambassador, I'm a SpecialEffect ambassador, and I used to serve on the board of directors for IGDA Scotland as well. I got this job straight out of university, and I learnt a lot on my first day and in the weeks that followed that I wanted to share with others in case it helped at all in your own career journeys. So I'll give you a bit of a background into who I am first. My original career path didn't involve games. I wanted to work in musical theatre, which often gets a bit of a mixed reaction. A lot of people say things like musical theatre and games are so vastly different. How did you end up there? And I argue that games has a real performance aspect to it that isn't too far away from musical theatre. And I've seen a lot of things recently with companies that do interactive theatre pairing up with games companies to create things, and a lot of that's very exciting to me. But that's that's an entirely different topic that I could talk about for a good hour or so. But when it came quickly apparent to me that musical theatre wasn't going to be for me, it was a very cutthroat industry and I wasn't going to be good enough for it. I quickly looked at what are my other passions, what do I enjoy? So I was good at science and I was good at maths, but I loved art and creative outlets, and I played a lot of games as well. But I never really thought of games as a career when I was younger. It wasn't something, I mean, games weren't made, right? They were made by magic. They just appeared in front of you and that's what you had. And it wasn't any kind of job. But it was by complete accident that I stumbled upon that it was a career. I played a lot of The Sims when I was a teenager, and I quickly got into creating custom content. And it was when I was creating some custom content, I was looking at EA's website and looking for, I can't remember, some sort of forum, some links to help me out with a problem I was having. And I noticed a page titled University Visits. I was about 15 at this stage. I had started to worry about what I was going to do in the future and talking about university. And I was lucky because I live in Scotland that I didn't need to worry about full university tuition fees. But my curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on this link because I was thinking, well, I don't know, why am I looking here? I need to study in Scotland. And then I saw Abertay University, Dundee. And I was shocked because if games were made by people, they weren't made in Scotland. They were made in the USA or in America or somewhere very far away from where I currently was. It seemed very distant to me. But I'm so glad I did because I immediately applied and I got in. I was lucky that my parents played games too, and so they understood when I told them that I wanted to make games. I remember when I was about 6, my mum and dad got me a Nintendo 64 because I got a good report card. That kind of backfired on them because it definitely wasn't for a good report card. It was a little bit of an excuse so that they could get a Nintendo 64, and then every time I got a good report card, I was like, "Where's my games console? What? What do you mean I don't get another one?" So they worked very hard for this, and so when I told them that I wanted to study to make games, they were very, very supportive. But outside of this environment, I did run into quite a bit of friction. From day one, I was starting to be filled with doubts. My teachers would ask things like, "Are you sure you want to work in games? Is that really a viable career? Is that a smart job choice?" And even when I was in my early years of university and before this, some of my so-called friends told me that I was only joining the industry to get the attention of men, and it wasn't actually for myself and for me. But actual university was a little different. I started studying computer games technology at Abertay University. It's one of the programming courses. But I still hadn't quite worked out what I wanted to do, just that I wanted to make games. It wasn't until my penultimate year of uni, which is your third year in Scotland, that I was introduced to a module called Technical Art Applications. In this module, the arts and the programming courses were put into the same room, and they were taught about creating scripted tools in Maya and character rigs, and I suddenly, everything clicked just at once. I suddenly felt like this is the room where I want to be in. This is the amalgamation of logic and creativity that I was talking about, that I was so desperately craving. And so I went to kind of focus on that more. I studied at Bournemouth University. I studied for a master's in computer animation and visual effects, which was more directed at film, but it was specifically the programming behind animation, and it gave me so much more of a base knowledge of well, a specialist subject, which was what I really, really wanted. And I suddenly felt like everything around me, I felt like I belonged a bit more. I felt really good about it. And in 2015, while I was studying for my master's, I was lucky enough to attend GDC in San Francisco as part of a scholarship given to me by the IGDA Foundation. I was joined by some incredible scholars who were rising stars in the industry, and we had all been given a stipend to get us across to the USA, to San Francisco, from wherever in the world we were, because without it, I wouldn't have been able to go. And as the week started out, I began going to a few talks and roundtables surrounded by these people, and seeing developers and hundreds of people on the kind of conference floor. And by lunchtime on Monday, I remember vividly being stood on a staircase, barely holding back tears, with a lump in my throat telling me I was not good enough to be there. It was a year in the industry that was full of unrest, especially for women, and I suddenly looked across this sea of developers, and all of the concerns I'd had in the past came back. We'd had, just before we went to GDC, the scholars that were given this opportunity had Reddit threads posted about them. The words from my friends from before, or so-called friends, came back to haunt me, and I felt like, am I really doing this for some other reason? What's happening here? I was full of doubts, and it just all came flooding back to me. By Thursday, I was still feeling shaken. I was lucky that the other scholars around me were kind, and I didn't talk too much about it, though. I was on my own when I felt like this, and I kept it as a bit of a secret to myself. But yeah, by Thursday, while I was still feeling shaken, I ended up in a talk titled "Number One Reason to Be," and it is a panel that transpired from a hashtag on Twitter, number one reason why and number one reason to be. And it talks about the number one reason that people were in the games industry. In this, Sela Davis, one of our group coordinators, discussed the topic of imposter syndrome. And it was the first time I'd ever heard of the subject, but so much of what she said was resonating with me. She discussed these internal monologues you can have of, oh, I'm just charming, or if I believe in myself, I'll be rejected. And they struck a chord so deep that I began to cry again. But the difference this time was, instead of feeling disconnected, instead of feeling like I was so far away from all these game developers, I was sitting amongst them. They were surrounding me, to my left, right, in front of me, behind me. We were all in this space together, and it was a busy, busy room. I left feeling motivated, empowered, and determined to get the best start in my career in the games industry that I could. Soon after, I got offered a job as a junior tools programmer at Rockstar. I'd been confident, I'd finished my master's, and was prepared for my first day in the office. But as soon as I sat down at my desk, I immediately felt out of my depth. The concerns and voices of the past came back to haunt me again, telling me that I managed to get this job only out of sheer luck, that I'd somehow managed to blag the interview, and I was going to be found out for the fraud that I am at any second. I did a talk at my old university at Abertay about imposter syndrome a few years ago. And in person, this was much easier to showcase. But I asked. It was a room full of developers, graduates from Abertay, and students still, and soon to be graduates. And I asked the room who on their first day sat down in the office, and if there are any devs in chat, that would actually be really useful if you could say the same thing. On your first day in a new job, who sat down and went, "Oh shit, I don't know what I'm doing. This is so over my head." And it is, because your first day is intimidating. You're surrounded by potentially a lot of new people, potentially a new code base. A lot of this I'm talking about is from a AAA standpoint, but it can be the same if you're in a small team and a big team. Around 70% of us experience imposter syndrome in our lives. 70%. It used to be thought that this only affected professional women, but we now know that's not the case. It affects everyone. It can affect everyone. And it's much clearer, but it's very easy to internalize that feeling still and convince ourselves that we are actually facing this alone, completely alone. Valerie Young wrote a book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women. And in this, she discusses 5 different types of imposter syndrome. I want to go through each of these and how they might kind of manifest in your first day, and see if any of them resonate with you or how you're kind of feeling about them. But the first is the perfectionist. Being a perfectionist is often something celebrated externally. We've all seen this kind of joke job interviews when someone's asked to list their flaws and they say, "Oh, you know, I'm a perfectionist." But it truly can be a mountain to climb internally. You can easily think that none of your work is ever good enough, and rather than focusing on your strengths, you begin to fixate on flaws or mistakes, like I just made. This leads to a great amount of self-pressure. There's the superhero, which is someone who takes on lots of roles. Feelings of inadequacy kind of lead the superhero to taking on far too many roles and measuring their worth based on how many of these roles they can juggle at once. However, this means falling short in any of these roles evokes shame because you feel like you should be able to handle it. There's the expert, who, even though they're highly skilled, they underestimate their own expertise. A minor lack of knowledge evokes shame, and you feel like you have to know everything, and you need to keep learning more and more and more. And on your first day, you'll be surrounded by people that you can learn from, but as an expert, you may instead feel intimidated by the knowledge around you, and that this is the level of knowledge you should be at, which it's not, and I'll get to that as well. But you feel like you can't show any weakness in that knowledge or you'll suddenly be found out. There's the natural genius as well. Perhaps for a long time you've been naturally, say, very good at programming. Maybe you set excessively high goals for yourself, and when you don't succeed on your first try, you feel crushed and maybe even give up. And then, so it's like when you feel like you're naturally good at these things and you come into somewhere with day one, there's a massive code base in front of you and you don't immediately understand all of it, or you've got a completely blank slate and you need to build up, and you've got loads to learn, it can be extremely overwhelming. And then the last is the soloist. This can manifest, I think this will resonate for a lot of people, this can manifest itself in believing you already have to know everything and you must do it alone. Not only this, but you can often reject offers of assistance too, as that can be seen as a sign of weakness or incompetence. And you can never, ever ask for help. That's the feelings that you get from them. But it's important to remember that as a graduate, you're not expected to know everything. University gives you a base knowledge, but it can't teach you everything. When you go to the workplace, there's so much more to learn. And that's good when you're starting out in the industry or even just in a new job. Even if you've been in the industry for years and you're starting day one in a new job, you're expected to ask questions because you're expected to learn. The job of a junior or a graduate at its core is to learn. So how do we combat this? A paper titled The Imposter Phenomenon by Sakulka and Alexander discusses the cycle of imposter syndrome. And that imposter syndrome continues when someone's unable to internalize their own success. I like that line a lot. This in turn fuels the imposter syndrome as it limits the acceptance of success as an outcome of one's own ability. So anything that you do, you don't think of it, any success that you have, you don't think of it as because of what you did. You think of it as because of luck or because of some other external factor. This obviously creates heightened anxiety of being found out, and so the cycle continues and perpetuates itself. The fear and guilt of success can also be a large factor. This, in the imposter phenomenon paper, it discusses how if you come from a family where you're maybe the first person to go to university, or you're the first person to hit success, then it can harbor feelings of imposter syndrome, of feeling like you don't deserve what you have worked for. This paper it's about 20 pages long, and I would highly, highly recommend reading it, The Imposter Phenomenon, as there were lots of moments in it when I was reading it that I was just like, oh, I do that. If any of the 5 types mentioned above resonate with you, or even if they don't, but you still feel like you're some sort of imposter, something you can do yourself to start to understand your own goals and your own definitions of success. Identifying these begins with working out what you believe you should do always and never. What your should always and never moments are, really. So for example, I should be able to handle all these things at once. I'd never ask for help. I'd always get it right first time, and so on. These are your limits. Anna Akana discusses that if you evaluate the hidden limitations that you set on yourself, what it means to be competent, you can begin to deconstruct why you feel like an imposter and start directly addressing the rules that you do set for yourself. It isn't just a solo effort, though. We can all work to combat imposter syndrome together. We've already discussed how there are so many potential ways that someone can feel like an imposter, but it may start early in your career, but it can also be continued throughout. Imposter syndrome can be fed by things like not being heard in meetings, by not having your ideas valued. So even from early in your career, when you're starting as a graduate or a junior in a company, and it may feel like you don't have much pull, or you're creating your own company and you're starting from the ground up, you can still do things to help. Listen to others, share ideas. You don't have to agree on everything, but work collaboratively rather than defensively, and we can create a working environments where creative ideas thrive and people feel heard. It's not easy feeling like an imposter, and it does come in waves and it goes in waves. Even before doing this talk, about half an hour ago, I joked on Twitter that I don't feel good enough to do a talk on not feeling good enough, which the irony of that is not lost on me. But I now understand so much more, thanks to Sela, thanks to my friends around me, my colleagues and everyone, that I'm not alone in that feeling. And that gives me more understanding and control over it. And if you feel like an imposter still, after doing everything above, then think of this. In Generation 7, Pokemon introduced Mimikyu. I love Pokemon. I don't know if you can tell. Mimikyu, if you don't know, is a Pokemon that wears a Pikachu costume, as it's aware of how popular Pikachu is and wants to use that to make friends, violently trying to stop anyone from looking underneath the cloth veil. Mimikyu is an imposter, but if Pikachu and many fans and people worldwide can accept and love Mimikyu, your workplace can accept you too. Thank you very much for listening. Anyone have any questions?
I'm muted. That was excellent. Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
I can see that a lot I found it quite relatable. Yeah, he seems to have got a lot of fans as well. So a lot of the questions that we've got in follow actually a very similar vein.
Sure.
I think from most people, it's while at university and feeling imposter syndrome before going into the industry. And a lot of people are concerned about, does this go away?
Sure. Yeah. I feel that it doesn't go away if you don't address it. Because I, as I mentioned at the end there, I do still feel it at times. It's not something that magically disappears, but I think the more that you talk about it and understand where it comes from, it can really, really help. It does get a lot easier with time as well, but it's also why I mentioned, your first day at a new job, because it can perpetuate throughout. It doesn't need to be your first day out of university at a new job. Your first day at any new job, you can be like, oh crap, there's a lot to learn here. But that's part of it. That's kind of why I was drawn to game development, is that there's so much learning to be done, that you're continuously learning, and it means that sometimes, that feeling can kind of creep up again of, oh, I'm a bit out of my depth here. But if you go back to those kind of rules of what are your should, always, never, that's what I've started to do a lot more, and just being like, well, why do I feel like I'm not achieving something here? Why do I feel like I'm an imposter? What's the goal or arbitrary rule of competence that I've set here? And I think working through those can really help.
One other one that's come up from James Kilduff. Is it normal to feel pretty lost and overwhelmed in the first year of uni? Although they're enjoying the material and aspects of game design, nothing's particularly stood out as something that they want to follow. Is this fairly typical at that stage?
Oh yeah, like completely. There was, in my first year of uni, I remember at one point I asked for help, and the supervisor at the time said, "Oh, you're smart, you'll figure it out." And I was like, "No, I won't. No help." And like it can be completely overwhelming, and I didn't know, because kind of as I mentioned, I knew I wanted to make games, but I didn't actually know that I wanted to do programming. I didn't know exactly what it was that I wanted to do, and it was only in my third year that I found this moment of aha. And I think if you think of university a little bit like this time to try a little bit of everything, and see what it is that clicks. So Jesse was talking about game jams earlier, and I've not done tons of them, but what I quite often did when I did do a game jam was I did something completely different. So I do audio or art, and that's not my area at all, but I did it for two reasons. One, just for a bit of fun, but the other was that I could see when I was doing that the issues that artists or audio engineers would face in their day-to-day, that meant that I could help them more, which is where my path took me, because tools programming is exactly that. You create tools to help artists and audio engineers, and it can be challenging and it can be intimidating in your first year, but it does get easier. And I'd say do a lot of research around what specialized roles are. Even just your first kind of instinct, do you want to work in AAA, indie, or start your own company? That, like, take that baseline and work from there and investigate deeper into those, because I think as well, university, because it gives you a little taste of each of these things, like in indie, you'll be working much more as a generalized programmer, whereas in AAA you'll be much more specialized. So yeah, I'd say start there, but it's totally normal, totally natural to feel like that.
Following on from the earlier one about getting imposter syndrome while in uni, we've also got a few questions from people studying non-games courses.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you'd say to them to kind of reassure them that there's still a path in?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have many colleagues that studied linguistics, studied history, studied things that you would not even begin to think are related to games in any way, and they still found their own paths. You don't need to have a university degree. You don't need to be 18 to 20 just out of school, going to uni. There are so many different paths, and the path that I've taken is is not the path for everyone either. As I said, like, I was very, very lucky that because I live in Scotland, I got tuition fees paid for me, and but yeah, for a lot of people that path might be self-taught, it might be college, it might be a university that has, as you said, nothing to do with games, but can still be used in many different areas. I know that there's jobs for things like costume creators. So that's another thing that's kind of like related to musical theatre that I was talking about before. There's people who study how to make costumes, and then that actually can be applied to games because they need to make character art and designs for this, and concept designs. And so yeah, no, it's definitely an achievable path no matter where you started.
Lynette asks, do you think job descriptions asking for too much, even in entry-level roles, feeds into the self-doubt and poor mental health in tech and gaming roles?
Yes, absolutely. There's some fascinating statistics that I don't have the exact names of who have done these studies, but on average, a man will apply to a job if there's 60%, if they meet 60% of the listed skills or qualifications, whereas a woman will apply only when they meet 100%. And there's more studies done on much broader aspects of the population and genders too, but that's the one that always sticks in my mind. There's a lot of, I think if you see a skills list, I was going to say ignore it. Don't ignore it, but but look at what things do hit, where you do hit. I mean, the animation tools job that I have, it was a mid-level role, and I just emailed the recruiter and went, "Hey, this is what I'm interested in, but I'm a graduate and I'm a junior. What do you think? Like, is there any possibility of that still happening?" And I was lucky enough that Kevin, who I got in contact with, had said, yeah, it's been open for a while. I'll talk to the leads and see if they're willing to take the role down. And they did. And I was lucky in that, but I also put myself out there. Don't be afraid to do that, because the worst they can say is no. And that obviously can be tough, but it's the number of, I'm trying to think how to word this. Don't put all of your onus on the skills that are listed in a job advert, because if you feel like you'd still be good at it and you only hit some of them, go for it. There's a high chance that they might at least give you an interview.
So this one's kind of been partially answered, but I'm having trouble with deciding what programming direction to go within the games industry. Was becoming a tools programmer something that you specialized in whilst at uni, or was it something that you fell into because of your job?
Sure. So yeah, I specialized when I was in uni, but specifically because I found that module, technical art applications, because I remember when I was younger, there was a special extras on the Monsters Inc. DVD, and it had Sully being moved by this thing, and I was like, what is that? And I never found out what that was until I was in this technical arts module, and it was a character rig, and I was like, wow. Even then I felt like I was 6 years old and getting my mind blown, and I was just like, this is incredible. So I was very lucky that in that moment I found that, but it was still like, it was half a semester, no, one semester, but half a year module. It was very short, and I then had to decide to go specialize in that. That's why I went to do a master's. But even then, I wouldn't have needed to specialize in that area. That was a kind of choice that I made. I'd found that in a lot of places, when you go into a role straight out of university, if you have a rough idea of what you want to do, they're much more helpful in getting you there. And while I wouldn't recommend this in general, in a AAA company at least, if you start off as a junior and you realize that you're not in the role that you want to be in, you can discuss that. There's not necessarily any guarantees that they can move you around, and I wouldn't ever apply for a job that you know you don't want to move into another sector. But you don't need to know 100% when you get out of uni. I even remember in my interview I was asked, well, because tools programming and technical art are two different roles, and tools programming being more the kind of programming focused side of that. And so when I was in my interview, I was asked, well, do you want to be a technical artist or do you want to be a tools programmer? I was like, well, I don't know. I'm just out of uni. I don't know, but I feel like this is the right path for me and I'll work that out. And that got a good response. So yeah.
Just had a question from Twitch. Should you apply for an internship at companies where you don't realistically think you can get in?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I absolutely never thought that I was going to work at Rockstar. Never. And it was my first job out of industry. 100%. I applied for an internship at Pixar. I didn't think I could get that, and I didn't, but I still applied. Like 100%, because it's always practice. It's always useful. You'll always get, like, you can ask for feedback whenever you apply for things. If you get to an interview stage, you can ask for feedback on the interview, or you can just learn how to prepare for that interview. It's always a process of learning more, an opportunity, and if you kind of frame it like that, yeah, apply for everything that you can, even if you don't think you can get it, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's solid advice for everyone.
Yeah.
Not a question, but wanted to say this was very inspirational. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
We've got a couple of questions about actual programming language skills as well.
Okay.
There's two quite similar. I studied C# and C++ on my course. At the moment, I'm applying for roles looking for C# coding abilities, but I feel C++ is more sought after.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while now, and I'm still looking for work. Any advice for trying to get a first role in the industry when C# I feel more confident with?
Okay. Any advice? I know what you mean. I think it's role dependent again. C++ is more used for, like, I know that Unreal Engine uses C++, and I think that's kind of a good way to kind of frame it. Engine programming in general uses a lot more C++ in that area. So if it depends what you're wanting to get into. It could be that you just need to not specialize, but tailor your applications a little bit more and understand what you're applying for. So with C#, maybe you are more tools focused. Maybe you are more kind of on Unity developer style jobs, things like that. And if you realize that's not what you want to do, you might want to try specializing in C++ again. But I think if you look at a lot of job listings and a lot of the roles, they'll kind of mention there what coding languages they'd like. But also a lot of these jobs say that you do C++ as well, because they're more than happy usually for you to learn both. I interchange between the two on a daily basis. So both of them are valuable, but I think, yeah, have a wee look at what exactly you'd like to specialize in, and that should help you out.
And relatedly, after applying for so many jobs, it comes to C++ tests, which is always the biggest hurdle. I know I can make games and I've done lots of games programming work, but after a lot of rejections, how can you overcome the feeling that it's my skill and not just the right opportunity hasn't come along for me?
This is it's one very close to my heart. I despise coding tests, like on a personal level, because I don't work well in testing environments. Like, for example, my higher / like, I think it's A level in England, computing, I got an A for the coursework and then I got a C in the exam. It was pretty much exactly the same thing, but I just did not work well into those. And it's not a pressure environment, because you get under pressure in work too. And you can still work well in that. Exam environments are very specific and they're not the most fun. There are a couple of books on, I'm trying to remember the exact name. I think it's Cracking the Coding Interview, that you can look at, that specifically do programming test style questions, and teaches you how to sell yourself as part of your technical expertise and how to get the best out of what you know. Because a lot of the time, I mean, programming comes down to, I'll never forget, one of my lecturers gave me this piece of advice, or not advice, but this story. and it stuck with me, was that in one of his interviews, he was asked a question he didn't know, and he answered with, well, I don't know, but I can Google it. Because there's so much of it is understanding how to access all of these things. You cannot possibly hold every piece of programming knowledge in your head at one time. So technical interviews, sometimes there will be questions on there that you're not meant to answer either. Just focus on what you know, focus on selling yourself. And yeah, I'd highly recommend these books. There's Cracking the Code interview, and there's another one that came out recently that I can't quite remember, but I will retweet it on Twitter after this. If you follow me there, it's not a plug, but if you follow me there, I'll put the links up there. So hopefully maybe get Grads and Games to retweet that or something like
that. We've got time for maybe one more, but we've also just had another message in from Twitch. Not a question, but a thank you. I feel like I've struggled with imposter syndrome ever since I've left uni. The past 20 minutes have been so much more informational than years of advice from employers, friends, and family.
Oh.
So your talk's going down well.
Oh, thank you very much. That's very nice to hear. I'm very glad.
I think you've already answered that one. I'll cover it anyway. What are the differences between a technical artist and a tools programmer?
So a technical artist will more often work within a program and still have that art side to it. So things like the character rigs themselves, like working with a model, creating things like this and creating scripts to run expressions and things like that. That's more what a technical artist does. Whereas a tools programmer, and specifically I do animation tools, so they are very, very similar, but I more create the plugins for the apps, or I create standalone applications, and it's much more based on a programming side. I think that's maybe the main difference. It's like tools programming is programming and code, whereas technical art is more scripting and creating scripts to run within a program. I think that's the best way that I can describe it. Also, I just saw Andy, thankfully, put it in. I saw a couple of people in chat saying, what's your Twitter? But Andy sent it there, so that's good. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, I was going to end by saying, is there anything that you do want to plug?
That's it. That's me.
Well, thank you very much. That is an excellent talk, and I can tell from both chat windows that a lot of people have really picked up on it, and it's inspired quite a few, and a lot of people found it very relatable.
I'm very glad. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for listening as well. It's been great.
Thank you.